Okay, so we have Emor, some laws about the priests, about specifically the laws of purity and impurity and obligations of the priests, who they can marry, etc. And then toward the end of the parsha, there's a big chunk about the laws of the holidays. So a listing and elaboration on all of the holidays. So here we go. We start with the nutshell as usual. The name of the parsha, Emor, means speak, and is found in Leviticus chapter 21:1, and where God tells Moshe, speak to the sons, tell to the sons of Aaron, and convey the laws of the priesthood, or some of the laws of the priesthood. The Torah section of Emor, speak, begins with the special laws pertaining to the Kohanim priests, the Kohen Gadol high priests, and the temple service. A Kohen may not become ritually impure through contact with a dead body, save on the occasion of death of a close relative. A Kohen may not marry a divorcee or a woman with a promiscuous past. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, can marry only a virgin. A Kohen with a physical deformity cannot serve in the holy temple, nor can a deformed animal be brought as the offering. So that's a discussion in itself. We'll see if you want to get into that or not. Okay, next. A newborn calf or lamb or kid must be left with its mother for 7 days before being eligible for an offering. One may not slaughter an animal and its offspring on the same day. The second part of the Emor lists annual callings of holiness, what the Torah refers to as holiday, Mikra Kodesh, calling of holiness. We can talk about that term as well. The festivals of the Jewish calendar, which are the weekly Shabbat, the bringing of the Passover offering on the 14th of Nisan, the 7-day Passover festival beginning on the 15th of Nisan, the bringing of the Omer offering from the first barley harvests on the second day of Passover, and the commencement on that day of the 49 counting of the Omer, culminating in the festival of Shavuot on the 50th day. So far we had Passover, we had bringing of the Omer offering, the barley offering on the second day of Passover, and that's when you start counting, what we call counting the Omer, until Shavuot on the 50th day. Okay. Then you have a remembrance of blowing shofar on the 1st of Tishrei, what we will call Rosh Hashanah, a solemn fast day on the 10th of Tishrei, the Sukkot festival, the Sukkot festival during which we are to dwell in huts for 7 days and take the four kinds, beginning on the 15th of Tishrei, and immediately following immediately following the holiday of the 8th day of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day. Okay. Next, the Torah discusses the lighting of the menorah in the temple and the showbread lechem hapanim placed weekly on the table there. Again, seemingly it's not so easy to understand why we mention the menorah here again. This is the third time we're talking about the menorah, and the menorah appears at the end of Emor. Same thing with the showbread. Showbread, basically, there was bread that was made in the temple, placed on the tables, and then the Torah describes how the bread always has to be there and how it was distributed amongst the priests. Again, very important laws, but how does it end up here? That's something we want to think about. Finally, it's the only other episode. Only one. There's only two episodes in the book of Leviticus. One is the death of the sons of Aaron, and this is the other one, which is less famous and less pleasant, but it's here. So you get everything. You get the full package. Here we go. Emor concludes with the incident of a man executed for blasphemy and the penalties for murder, death, and for injuring one's fellow or destroying his property, which is monetary compensation. So that would be the story of a blasphemy. A person cursed God. Commentaries explain why he was so upset at God, and then there's the punishment. Now, if you want to hear more about blasphemy, I don't know if we're going to have time today, but it's on the agenda for tomorrow night for the JLI, which is going to mention that as well. So it's good that we're reading it this week. So this is the story in short, ladies and gentlemen. Any comments or questions, please jump in. Otherwise, we roll the dice and start from the beginning and see what happens. Okay. There's just one thing I want to say about the beginning of the parasha, the purity and impurity. And Benjamin says, nice plug. Yeah, yeah, that's always pushing, always selling. You come to Chabad, right away, they want to know what's the next mitzvah you're coming to. I just came to do one mitzvah. Yeah, but what's the next mitzvah? So that's a sign of a living organism which always grows. Something that stays the same and just as comfortable is not alive. Life is always growth. So that's good. Chaim. Okay, so the first thing I want to say about the beginning, there's prohibitions about the priest. He can't marry everybody. Certain people he cannot marry. And one of the most important things about the priest is that a priest is not allowed to become impure with the contact of coming in contact with a dead person. And that's a law that we even have today, even though we're all considered ritually impure because of the contact with a dead person, because everybody here touched a dead person. And if you didn't, you touched somebody who did. So everybody's ritually impure. Nevertheless, for the priest, there's still a prohibition that's relevant that not to make yourself impure again. So even if you are impure, you can't make yourself impure again. So priests have a thing where you don't go to a cemetery in certain conditions. Can't be under the same roof of a dead person or under a tree with a grave. So there's all kinds of restrictions on the priest that are relevant today. Going to certain hospitals could be problematic because many hospitals have a morgue. That's not so simple for a priest unless you have to. But these laws are relevant even today, even though most of the laws of ritual purity and impurity are not practiced in the same way because we don't have the temple and we're all ritually impure, so it's no problem. But just to say something about impurity and purity, we talked about it appears in the third book of the Torah, it appears in the fourth. And I don't know how much you want to talk about it right now, but I just want to say something that I read years ago. It made a big impression on me from I think I read it from Rabbi Shamshon Fall Hirsch, and he says if you look around, and it's true in Greenwich, and oh, what's the problem? Am I fit? Something is broken. Audio is not clear. Um, I'm sitting in a room that, because of the move, it's emptier than usual. So that may be the echo. Um, there's not many tables at Chabad right now. So, but I'll look around. Okay. So we'll look around. We'll see if the room would change it. Everybody, is it Vicky, do you hear me?
No,
Or it's
for me it's normal.
you, it's normal. Okay, we'll take a walk. We'll see what happens. Either way, so this is from Rabbi Shamshon Fall Hirsch, and he talks about this in the context of looking around at other faiths. And I would never realize this just because I never realized this, but then you drive around town and you see it. And he says that other houses of worship, you have the cemetery at the church. In the courtyard of the church, you have the cemetery. And he says that, and the law is that within Judaism, it's obviously different. But just to make the point how starkly different it is, you're not allowed to bury a person in Jerusalem. So the the you can't bury a person in Jerusalem. The big cemetery or the very old cemetery in Jerusalem, which is Mount Olives. So Mount Olives is actually outside the boundaries of the city of Jerusalem. I don't know if you know that. In other words, it's not in the city. It's adjacent to the city. It's adjacent to the city, but it's not in the city. And the reason is because, like I said, the priest is not supposed to come in contact with a dead person. Whoops, what happened here? What's happening here? Let's try this again. Okay, the priest is not supposed to come in contact with a dead person. And the priest is the holy person. And in other cultures, it's the opposite. If you go to the church, and that's where you come in contact with the dead, with the cemetery. So it's an interesting contrast. And what he says is that the idea of priesthood would be different in Judaism than in other cultures, and that's because Judaism as a religion is different than other religions. I say this every time in different contexts, but it's interesting. So he says, what is the idea of spirituality for other faiths? In other words, what's the role of the priest? The role of the priest is to help you how to get to heaven, right? Essentially what it is if you want the afterlife. And then you have to follow what do all religions basically say? You have to we have the key to the afterlife, and if you want to get the afterlife, you have to follow our path. So you go to the house of worship because you want to know how to get to the afterlife. And when I was a young boy, and when I was 15, and we would go to Manhattan and ask people to put on tefillin, and people would have these conversations with you, theological conversations, and someone really says, "I don't understand why you're spending your whole life on this world to prepare for the world to come." And it's true, there is a notion that you prepare in this world for the world to come. But coming from a Jewish perspective, and certainly from the Hasidic perspective, that was not something I related to at all whatsoever. It's not why we keep the religion, to figure out how to get to the world to come. Maybe that's a benefit too. That's not why we do it. We do it because we feel that this is the way a person should live in this world, right? But the idea of the faith, or the person of faith, or the person who, the priest, the person who represents the house of faith, is the path to heaven. That's a common faith. But Judaism, and therefore, it's not a contradiction. The death and the house of worship are not so far apart, because essentially that's what the house of worship is supposed to do, to ensure the afterlife. But it says in Judaism, what is the priest? The priest is to tell you how to live. The priest is, could you bring the holiness into this world? So death is the antithesis of holiness, the way we define it. What is the definition of holiness? Connection of the physical and spiritual. So of course, the souls are holy, 100%. But the priest's goal is to teach you how to connect your soul and your body, not how to disconnect. And that's why the priest, the person who represents ultimate holiness in this world, um, is antithetical to the notion and the concept of death. So that's just interesting, right out there at the Parsha as a visual. And you drive by Greenwich and you'll see the churches, and they're all going to have a cemetery, not all, but some. So that's something that I thought was interesting. Okay. I don't know if this is, I don't know if I should talk about this, because this makes people a little bit uncomfortable. That is also why, if you want to think about it, why the Torah, it was actually in the nutshell, the Torah would says that someone who's physically handicapped in certain ways, or deformed or handicapped physically so, cannot perform the service in the temple. You're a priest, you can get the benefits of the priesthood, you get to either tithings, you can do certain services at a temple, but you cannot bring the offerings in the temple. You have to be physically complete. And the question is, why is Judaism so external? We look at the physical. I thought we're supposed to say that the soul is the most important. So what if the person is physically handicapped? That should be a reason why he can't perform the service. So this is something that is hard for people to relate to. And there are different responses. One response, for example, is the idea that the common practice is, when do people turn to God? Common practice, unfortunately, is people turn to God when there's difficulty. And that's a legitimate reason to come close to God. But the idea of the priesthood is showing that when is a person supposed to come to God? Not only when a person is weak, but when a person is strong, and when a person is full and has everything that they need. And that's when they have a relationship with God. So as a symbol, the priest is the symbol of the service of God. As a symbol, if you put a symbol of a person who is weak and physically handicapped, and you say, of course he's serving God. But we want the symbol of completeness. And that's why the high priest has to be even more complete. He has to be good looking. He has to be wealthy. Cannot have any idea married. He can't have any lacking, because then the notion is you're reinforcing the stereotype that, yes, when a person is lacking, you have to turn to God. Yeah, but what about when a person has everything they need? That's when you have to serve God. Serve God at a place of wholesomeness, not only at a place of difficulty. Not that there's anything wrong with turning to God when it's difficulty. That's one perspective. But if you want to go to a deeper perspective, a Hasidic perspective, a Kabbalistic perspective, it's similar to the idea of the priesthood. The idea is connecting the physical and the spiritual. So a priest, if somebody has a physical handicap, that means that they have a spiritual mission, and their mission would be different, is altered by their physical handicap, and their physical handicap is not related to this part of the body. I mean, their spiritual mission is not related to this part of the body, because this part of the body, they're handicapped about this part of the body. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean they're not holy. It doesn't mean they're not spiritual. It doesn't mean they don't have a spiritual purpose. All that is correct. But their purpose is not related to the connecting of the soul to every facet of the body, because there is a disconnect between the life force and the physical body. And for a Kohen, that's not right. For a Levi, that's right. Levi is music. Levi is transcendence. Levi is going upward. Yes, for a Kohen, it's going upward. For a Levi, goes upward. A Levi is Gevura. A Kohen is Chesed, is drawing down. And that's related to the first point that I made about what is a priest, what is Kohen, what is holiness, what is Kedusha. In this world, there's different definitions, but in this world, in this context, it's connecting the physical and the spiritual. So that is a little bit about the notion of the priesthood and the priest not becoming ritually impure, and the priest being even physically complete and wholesome. That's a little bit about about the priesthood. And now we could talk a little bit about the holidays. And I'm just thinking where to start from. The first point we could think about, which I haven't spoken about this before, but it's very interesting. The Rebbe has a beautiful essay on this. Why are we talking about the holidays in the middle of a weekday day that it's not a holiday? I mean, it is technically because this period is mentioned in the Parsha, the counting of the Omer. But it's not a holiday. We're reading, all of a sudden, we're reading about the holidays. So why am I thinking about the holidays right now? So here you get to a philosophical discussion that talks about the relationship with the holidays, which are, as you see in this week's Parsha, specific times and the rest of the time. In other words, how does the holiday affect the time that is not holiday? Okay, so that's what we want to give a minute or two as an introduction before we talk about the holidays. So there is a very famous a Jewish song or a Jewish poem that becomes a song that is at the end, which I don't know, I'm not talking in firsthand, and you'll see why I don't know it. But at the end of the Passover Seder of most customs, and it's called Chasal Sidur Pesach. Chasal Sidur Pesach Kihilchato, which means we concluded the order of the Pesach Seder. Seder means order. We concluded the Seder in the proper form, and we're giving praise to God that we were able to fill the Seder. If you do the Seder, there's a lot of steps. You have to drink a lot of wine. You have to eat a little matzah. It's not such a simple feat to do all the rituals of the Seder. So there's a beautiful song that we say we concluded the Passover Seder, and we say just like we conclude. Whoops, touch something. I did something wrong. What happened here? Okay. So we finished the Seder, and we say, just like we finished the Seder this year, so too God should give us the blessing that next year we can be like similar to Shechianu. God brought us to this occasion, and next year God should bring us the opportunity that we should be able to do the Seder again. What a beautiful song. It happens not to be in the Chabad Siddur. In the Chabad Siddur, in the order of Passover, that song does not appear. Other songs don't either, but this doesn't appear. And the previous Rebbe explained why. He said, how could you get up and say the Passover Seder is complete? It's not complete. It continues the whole year. Okay, so that's just addressing the notion of I celebrated the holiday and there's sort of a division between holiday and the rest of the year. So thinking about this question, there's an interesting philosophical discussion that we can talk about, and it's a halachic discussion, but it's also a philosophical discussion and a psychological discussion. So you have certain mitzvot in the Torah that are specifically time-bound, and they are called time-bound mitzvot, and they're different than the non-time-bound mitzvot in some areas. So, for example, the mitzvah to eat matzah Passover is time-bound. The mitzvah to shake lulav is time-bound. Shaz, literally in Aramaic, mitzvah saseh shaz man grama. It's a positive mitzvah that the time causes it. In other words, there are some mitzvot that have nothing to do with time, right? Eat kosher. Eat kosher is a universal mitzvah. In other words, it applies to all time. It doesn't apply to a specific time. Belief in God. Belief in God is a mitzvah that's constant. Not all, but many of the negative mitzvot are constant. You know, don't eat pork. It's not don't eat pork when in a certain time of day. It's never. You don't do it. So there's time-bound mitzvahs. There's non-time-bound mitzvahs. The time-bound mitzvahs, there's a notion, a superficial notion, that it applies only to a specific time. But in the 20th century, and later we'll get to the Hasidic point, but in the 20th century, some of the great Talmudic commentators, they start piercing sort of this definition, and they say, what does it really mean that something is time-bound? And they set out to prove that in some ways, a time-bound mitzvah is actually a constant mitzvah. It's just that practically you'll only do the mitzvah at a certain time. In other words, I know this sounds crazy, you have a mitzvah to eat matzah 365 days a year. You are obligated to eat matzah 365 days a year. Technically, the time that you have to do it is only on the 15th of Nisan, but the obligation is upon you always. And there's a great Polish sage, Rabbi Yosef Engel, who the Rebbe loved him and loved to quote him. And he's got beautiful books, and he makes this point, and he brings 20 examples in the Talmud where a time-bound mitzvah affects the time before and after. And then one argument he puts forth, it's not even in the Talmud, he says, this is my own logic, but it's beautiful, so I'll say it. He says, what happens? There's a concept called somebody who's mevatel mitzvah, say, someone who cancels a positive mitzvah. If I have an opportunity to do a positive mitzvah and I don't do it, I'm canceling a positive mitzvah. Okay. What happens if a person is sitting in a town on Sukkot? He has a lulav. There's only lulav in town. He has a lulav. And Sukkot morning he gets up and instead of shaking the lulav, he takes the lulav and throws it into the fire. So it's not a sin, but it's canceling a positive mitzvah. Because now, because of this action, he cannot do a positive mitzvah. So this is classified as mevatel mitzvah, say, canceling a positive mitzvah. Positive as an active, something you have to do. Okay. So now Rabbi Yosef Engel says, let me ask you a question. What happens if today, what's today? April 28th. April 28th, I take my lulav. I have a beautiful lulav, but it's not Sukkot. April 20th, I take my lulav, I throw it into the fire. I burn my lulav. As a result of that, by the time Sukkot comes around, there's no more lulavs. Let's say there's a drought, there's no more lulavs. I burnt my lulav today, the afternoon, 12/28 and April 28th, I burnt my lulav. Now he has a very interesting question. Could you classify me as someone who canceled a positive mitzvah? So the reason to say no is there's no positive mitzvah to shake lulav. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in the middle of April. This is not Sukkot. There's no such thing as a positive mitzvah. The positive mitzvah doesn't start until the 15th of Tishrei, until Sukkot. So how could you tell me that because I did an act today on April 28th, you're telling me because I did an act on April 28th, that's why that mitzvah, now I'm someone who can be classified as canceling a positive mitzvah. There is no positive mitzvah to burn the lulav, to shake lulav on April 28th. Rabbi Yosef Engel says, I know there's no Talmudic, he has many other Talmudic proofs, 20 Talmudic proofs, I'm not going to get into that. But this one, he says, to me, it's obvious that you cancel, this person, if I burn my lulav today, April 28th, 12/29, I canceled a positive mitzvah. Why? So Rabbi Yosef Engel says, because what is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is do whatever you can all year so that pass of Sukkot morning you have a lulav. That's the mitzvah. In other words, the mitzvah is on a person. I am obligated. That's the person. I am obligated that when Pesach comes, I eat matzah. But it's not that this obligation only applies to a specific time, because that time is holy. But in addition to that time being holy, the obligation is upon the person. And the person operates 365 days a year. So I am a person that has to say lulav at a certain specific time. I am a person that eats matzah at a certain specific time. I am a person who is joyous for Simchas Torah at a specific time. But that person is me, and I operate throughout the year. So now you understand the leap is very small. Now the Hasidic commentary rides on that Talmudic analysis and says, 1 second. So basically what you're saying, even when you read about the holidays, even when you're reading about the time-bound mitzvot, the message and the obligation is on the person a whole year. A whole year, you are somebody who is obligated in experiencing freedom. Yeah, the time that you're going to feel it more than others is Passover. But you are the person. So that theme, it's not a theme that's isolated to 7 days of the year, 8 days of the year. That theme is a whole year, it's upon you. But the practical application of that is specific. But what we just did is we just said that any of these holidays actually, because it's a obligation on the person and the person operates the whole year, it's actually upon the person the whole year and it's relevant for the whole year. So freedom is relevant the whole year. Joy is relevant the whole year. Everything is relevant the whole year. So I'm sorry for bringing this Talmudic analysis, but I was so excited about it because it's so much fun. So I had to share. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. First of all, I'm seeing 2 berries there. Maybe that's why there was an echo.
Oh, but it's Barry. Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. So
tech support. We have whatever. We have philosophy. We have Talmudic analysis. We have tech support. Whatever you could need, you can have.
Yeah, but I also had a question about this specific time of year.
Yes.
Actually doing that gradually. So this day we concentrate on this sphere and that sphere. So we do like on the background, the program is talking about tech support. On the background, the program is running that we are obligated to be all of those holidays today, but there is a specific
on the front burner. Yeah.
On the front there is a specific focus on whatever it is today, like something of Netzach.
Yes, yes, yes. So Bricky is talking about that Kabbalistically there are 7 weeks, and the Kabbalists explain that, and it's one of those Kabbalistic notions that actually made it into widespread circulation because it made it into the prayer book, and not just the Chabad prayer book, but many prayer books. They explain they have this point where 7 weeks that are between Passover and Shavuot is a time to refine the seven character traits. Every week you get focus on one character trait of the seven that are mentioned in the Zohar and previously in the books of Kabbalah, previous to that in the books of Kabbalah. And then 7 times 7 is 49 because in holiness, each trait, each character trait includes all seven. So even in the prayer books that are not necessarily Kabbalistic, you're going to see that when you count the Omer, there's going to give you a specific sphera. So that is correct, and that is not written explicitly in the Torah, but it definitely goes back a long time.
On that specific day, we can concentrate on something that's relevant today, but keeping in mind on the background that we are.
Yes, everything is always relevant. Everything is always relevant. In other words, you cannot separate the person from the time. You are a person who celebrates Passover. That notion of freedom is going to affect you the whole year, even if the whole year you're eating bread and you're not telling the story in the same well, you mention the story every day twice when you mention the Exodus, but even though you're not living it the way you do on Passover. So in other words, when in general, when you say something applies to a specific time, this according to this Talmudic analysis, which later becomes the Hasidic analysis as well, because we layer it with the Hasidic with the spiritual meaning, but even the legal meaning would say you are a person who is obligated to do this at a specific time, but that obligation is upon you, and you are constant. And because you are constant, the obligation is constant. So it's a little radical. Honestly, it's radical. But again, it's not. It's sound Talmudic analysis, and we can do a class on this and bring all 20 proofs that he brings. For example, just one example. Example is that there are restrictions on whether or not you could set out to a journey 3 days before Shabbat, or it's too close to Shabbat. In the olden days, today it's easy to travel. In those days, travel was a big deal. It's going to affect your Shabbat observance. So now you have to say, well, if you're traveling for a mitzvah, if not for a mitzvah, but that whole discussion is only possible because you're obligated today to plan ahead for Shabbos. Why am I obligated to plan ahead for Shabbos? Where does it say that on Wednesday I have to restrict what I do because something is going to happen on Shabbos? On Shabbos, I'll deal with Shabbos, and if to save my life, I'm allowed to violate the Shabbat on Shabbos, so I'll violate the life on Shabbat. That's what I would think. But in other words, that's if you take the idea that the obligation is only on a specific time and only on that time, then that would be the ramification. But if you say no, Wednesday you already have to start planning for Shabbat, what does that mean? That means that you are the person that is obligated to do what you can to rest on Shabbat. But when is that obligation upon you? Always. The practical resting is only day 7, but the planning ahead, that's upon you always. So that's just one example. He brings 20 examples. More or less 20. I don't remember how many exactly. Okay, that was fun. That was just, I never said this before. So we've been doing this for a little while now. So this is new. So I had to share. Okay, one thing to say about the Jewish holidays is very interesting. And that is as follows. Every single agricultural society has holidays that are associated with agriculture. Okay, so you have the harvest. I'm not sure how many holidays they have, but we have multiple harvests. We have, by the way, the Omer, when they first brought the second day of Passover, when they bought the barley, that was because that's when barley ripened. Now, wheat didn't ripen until 7 weeks later, approximately a few weeks later. And therefore, in the Torah, you're not allowed to eat the new barley. Sorry, take that back. You're not allowed to eat any new grain until the second day of Passover when they bought the Omer for the barley. It's in this parsha, beautiful mitzvah. It's called Chadash. You can't eat from the new grain until they brought the new barley to the temple. Today there's no temple, so you have to wait till the second day of Passover to pass. And then they would not bring new wheat, that's barley. They wouldn't bring new wheat to the temple until Shavuot. Shavuot, they would bring the new wheat as an offering in the temple. So one's barley, one's wheat. The point is, and then we have the harvest. That's so Pesach is Aviv. Aviv is spring. Spring basically means the etymology of the word Aviv is that the kernels are ripened. So it's the holiday of the ripening of the wheat of the wheat or of the ripening of the wheat or the ripening of the grain. And then you have Shavuot, which is the harvest. Chag HaKatzir, the harvest. And then you have Sukkot, which is Chag HaAsif, which is the ingathering. After all summer, they would put out the produce to dry. And then once it's dry, this doesn't rain in Israel, so it's not, we don't have to worry about getting wet and getting spoiled. To the contrary, that's when it dries. In fact, the word kites in modern Hebrew, the word kites in Hebrew means dried dates. That's what the word kites means, because kites is the season that you're going to dry the fruit. And then at the end of the summer, you bring everything into your house, so you have an ingathering. But that's not uncommon to every culture. There's so many cultures. Every agricultural society has holidays to celebrate the agricultural cycle, and Judaism does as well. What's interesting about Judaism is those same holidays have also historic meaning. Passover, we left Egypt. Shavuot, we got the Torah. And Sukkot also is associated with the historical story of the Exodus because we sit in the Sukkah because God placed us in Sukkahs when we left Egypt. Okay? So now something very strange is happening. Why are we celebrating in the Sukkah? Every holiday has two reasons. Every holiday has both a natural reason and a reason that highlights to a miraculous reason, meaning God's providence, which is not natural. Doesn't follow the cycle of it doesn't follow the cycle of the seasons. So what we're doing here is we say, well, we don't want to make too many holidays. No one's ever going to work, right? You got too many holidays. What we're doing here is every holiday has two layers of meaning. Every cycle, all the holidays have two layers. There's the natural cycle and there's the historic cycle. But historic is just a fancy word for saying cycle of miracles, cycle of God's intervention in history to relate to the Jewish people. Now the question is, why are we doing this? Just make different holidays. So you say it's more efficient. Okay. But philosophically or theologically, that's the whole point. The whole point is to show it's not that we have nature, and then once in a while God comes in and steps in and performs miracles. And miracles are unnatural events or unexpected. The whole idea of Judaism is that it's one and the same. The nature and the miracle are both expressions of the same divine, of the oneness of Hashem. Hashem expresses himself through the natural order. That's one place you can find God. Where do you find God? Some people have to find God. They have to go to the extraordinary experiences. Something happened to me you would never believe. That's where I felt God. Even something as natural as childbirth, but it's not every day. Something happened to me. I felt the presence of God. Something unusual, and that's one legitimate way of feeling God when something unexpected and unnatural happens. But there's another way to sense the closest to Hashem, and that is when you see the natural order. You're walking down the street and you see the flower blossoming. You see this is the power. This is the beauty of creation of God. And I feel close to the creator because I see the creation. Just like if you would see a painting, you see the art, you would sense a closeness to the artist. And the whole point is that they are two separate tracks, but they're two expressions of the same God. And that's why you don't need two different cycles, one for the natural order, for the agriculture, and one for the miraculous. The same holiday does both because both come from the same God. So just for the general, there's already a message in the general concept of why do we celebrate? And what is the reason for the celebration? And if you go around the table at your holiday and say, you learned the Torah, what are you celebrating? What's the reason for the celebration? And everyone's going to say another reason. And the reasons seem conflicting, seem different. Are we celebrating the natural event that the produce ripened? Or are we celebrating the extraordinary event that God comes and takes us out of Egypt? Which one is it? And the answer is both. Both on the same holiday? Yes, that's the whole point. Both come from Hashem. Both are two expressions of the same oneness of God. So that is introduction to everything else that we're going to say, because that's what's unique about Judaism's holidays is that they have both meanings, both layers of meanings. And the point is both layers of meanings are one and the same. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing that I haven't said in the past. Today is I'm trying to say things I haven't said in the past. So that's the thing for today. Now, is it just me, or had anyone heard kids running around saying 6-7? Anyone heard 6-7? Is it a thing, or it's just
It was this thing a while ago. Now it's kind of fading away.
now it's fading away? Okay, I want to talk about 6-7. I have no idea what it was. Anyone know what it was? Nobody knows.
Yeah, 6-7 is from the song, but I posted something on Instagram that 6-7 it's 6 days of creation and seventh
Oh,
day.
oh, oh. 6 days of creation and Shabbos. Okay, very good.
I liked because it was before
Oh
Shabbat.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's very good, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm basically going to talk about the idea that almost all the holidays are 6-7. And that explains, I alluded to this question earlier because I suspected I may talk about this. But that alludes to the what I explained earlier about the end of the parsha, which seemingly doesn't really belong here because you want to tell us about the offerings of the temple. That's either in the second book or in the beginning of the third book. But now we're not talking about the offerings. Now we're talking about holidays and laws that are relevant to most Israelites. And then here you look at the end of the parsha, and we talked about this, and all of a sudden you look at all of a sudden you look at the end of the Torah. Next Torah discusses the lighting of the menorah in the temple and the showbread, lechem hapanim, placed weekly on the table there. So we have and by the way, there is a custom where people actually read the text of the it's in the prayer book. It's not very well known, but on the Shabbos prayer, everyone's running to challenge, everyone's running for the Kiddush. But toward the end, you're going to see that there are these words, "V'lokachta says, take the grain and make the bread." That's from this week's parsha, is in the prayer book. People are supposed to say, people say it every single week. Okay, what am I getting to? I want to just read those verses and we see what this is doing here, and this helps us get to the bigger point. Here we go. So I'm reading Leviticus chapter 24, which is toward the end of the parsha. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the children of Israel, and they shall take for you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle lamps continually." Almost this entire verse was written almost verbatim twice already in the Torah. Okay. Okay, so he talks about this light the menorah. Okay, I'm skipping to verse 5. And you shall take fine flour and bake it into 12 loaves. Each loaf shall be made from 2/10 of an ephah, and you place them in two stacks, six in each stack, upon the pure table before the Lord. So you had 12 loaves of bread, and the 12 loaves of bread were piled on the table with two stacks, six apiece. And then, verse 7, you shall place pure frankincense alongside each stack, and it shall be a reminder for the bread, a fire offering to the Lord. Each and every Shabbat day you shall set it up before the Lord to be there continuously from the children of Israel, an eternal covenant. And it shall belong to Aaron and his sons. They shall eat it in the holy place, for it is a holy of holies for him, among the fire offerings of the Lord, an eternal statute. In other words, they would take the bread, and every Shabbat they would eat the bread from the last week. So basically, they're eating bread that's a week old, and the tradition is that it was miraculous; it was still fresh. But that's what we read about. So the menorah shows up, and the table shows up. So the question is, how did this land here? Like, who placed it here? I mean, God placed it here, but why would He place it here? So one interpretation that I read, I think it's two different people. I think so. I think Or Chaim spoke about it, and others speak about it. Well, the Or Chaim is the first one. So I'm just going to take a peek here. Close this share screen. Okay, so he says, if you look at the holidays are full of the number 7. First of all, there are 7 holy days, which also could be divided to 6, 7. So for what are the 7 holy days? First and last day of Passover. I'm talking about in Israel. First and last day of Passover. Shavuot is 1 day. Then you have Rosh Hashanah, 1 day. Yom Kippur, 1 day. Sukkot, first day, and last day Shmini Atzeret. You have 7 holidays. Of those 7 holidays, 6 are holidays, and which you can do some labor. You can cook on holidays from an existing fire. You can light candles. And then you have Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the Shabbat of the Shabbat. It's the Shabbat of the holidays. Okay? So you have 7 holidays. Of those 7, you have 6 plus Yom Kippur. Okay? Happens to be that the high holidays are the 7th month. Because Nisan is the 1st month. So Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot is 7th month. And so on. So there's a lot of 7 Shabbat. In the beginning of the holidays, it lists Shabbat. So Shabbat is also 6 and 7. So the Or HaChaim says like this. The reason why he talks about the menorah here and the bread, because here he's listing all the concepts of where you have 7. Menorah is 7 branches. Our menorah has 8 because we're commemorating the 8 days of the miracle. But the original menorah in the temple is 7. And 7 can also be divided to 6 and 7 because there's 3. There's one stem, and then there's 3 branches coming out from each side. In other words, 3 branches to each side, so you end up with 7 because the stem is 1. But you have 7, and again, but there's 6 and there's 7. And then he goes to the table. Table is the same thing. You have 12 loaves of bread, but it says 6 marachot, 6 layers, and 6 plus the table is 7. So the Or HaChaim says, he doesn't explain why, but we'll get to the next commentary. But the Or HaChaim says, now we understand why. Following the story of the menorah and of the holidays, which are all divided into number 6 and 7. You get to, you'll get, and by the way, forgot one. He said also in this parsha is count 7 weeks. Again, the number seven. So it's all about the number seven. And he says that's why following all these number sevens, you're going to talk about the menorah, which is number seven. And then you're also going to talk about the you're also going to talk about the table, which is 6 loaves and the table. So we all know that seven is nature, is the holiness. Well, we also say seven is natural order and eight is above nature. We're not going to talk about eight now. We spoke about that earlier in the book. But seven is the number, is a holy number in Judaism. But more specifically, and I think this is connected to what I said earlier in the class, seven is the completeness of nature. Eight is beyond nature. So holiness of nature is seven. Why seven? Well, the 7 days of the week, seven sefirot. Okay, but what's the physical visual? So a physical visual for this is from the Maharal. The Maharal, 16th century, also commentator and Kabbalist and philosopher, he says that anything physical is number six. Why? Because anything with 3 dimensions is number six. Has 4 directions: east, west, north, south, up, down. Everything gets 3 dimensional. Has 6 directions. So six is something physical. What is seven? Seven, he calls it the point in the middle of this of the 3 dimensions, which basically is what is the point of all of this? Yes, you have a physical entity, and the physical entity is 3 dimensional. 3 dimensional equals six. But then you say, what is the purpose of this? Purpose of the six is seven. And he says everything in Judaism, you'll see the seven is not just spiritual, it's the purpose of the physical. Eight is the holiness and the holiness that transcends physical. So it's not related. We talk about why number eight, why eight is infinity, is above the seven, another story. But this idea, I thought this is beautiful, that you have the six as a visual. The six is everything physical. And the seventh is the seventh point, which would be what is the purpose of this physical. So you have 6 days of the week. What's the purpose of work of 6 days of the week? So you have Shabbat, etc.
That's beautiful. I think you need to name this recording 6-7.
6, 7. Yeah, I'm looking. I have to find a title for the thing. But yeah, I'm trying to translate this the way he wrote it. He wrote beautiful. He says like this. He says you should know that number seven is lower than eight. He says number seven is the way something that transcends physical is related to the physical, meaning it's not completely transcendent. And he says, therefore, you will find that number seven always has both mundane, chol, and holiness. He says you have 6 days of the week. 6 are mundane. Shabbat is holy. You have months. Seventh week, seventh month is holy, and the other months are not holy. So it's not there. It's not 6, 7, but 7 is holy, and the rest are mundane. And he says, in next parsha, we're going to talk about the 7 years of the Shemitah, the sabbatical. Again, 6 years are mundane. Seventh year is holy. So it's always going to be number seven is almost always, in all these examples, it's almost always where you're going to have 6 is mundane and 7 is holy. And he says, all this is because number 6 is chol, number 6 is mundane, because that represents the 6 directions of the physical. 3 dimensions has 6 directions, right? Up, down, 4 directions of northwest, east, west, north, south. And he says the seventh is the central point, and that's the essence of it. And he doesn't say those words purpose, but I'm saying that's the purpose. And he says this is well known. That's what the Maharal says. So I thought that's beautiful.
Yeah. No wonder it became the word of the year, 6-7. It was
Yeah.
it was widely used, especially among children.
Children, yeah. I had to figure out what the original etymology of that is.
It's I think it's the height of a basketball player or something
Oh
like
yeah, okay. Now I just said this what ties into the beginning, because in the beginning we spoke there. What's a Kohen? The Kohen is not about transcendence. That's other faiths, maybe. Kohen is about sanctifying the physical, and that's why the Kohen is antithetical to death. So the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha really have a common theme. What's the common theme? The number 7, which means not the transcendence of physical, but sanctification of the physical. So you can connect those points. Okay, I think I'm going to conclude a few minutes early, but I'm going to conclude with something because I said everything new. I'm going to say something that I said for many, many, many years, and I love to say it. And it's one of my favorite teachings about the holidays. So if you heard it already, I apologize. You can go. You have. I'm not going to be offended if you go off early. It's complete. It's no problem. It's no problem. It's really no problem. I'm not going to be offended. And I like to call it the moon and the holidays. And the idea is that the holidays are divided based on different months of the days of the month, the Hebrew month. And we know the Hebrew month is pegged to the cycle of the moon. Day one of the month is rebirth of the moon. Day 15 is full moon. And then day 7 is sort of day 6, and 7 is sort of 6 and 7. Again, you have day 6. Shavuos is the day 6 of the month. And day 6, it's like a half a moon. So this is not by mistake. Of course, nothing is by mistake. So the idea here is I like to talk about relationships. And I say in a relationship, I talked about this all the time. In the relationship, who is supposed to be the one who initiates? Who is supposed to be the one that said, okay, let's go out for dinner? Where are we going to go? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That sounds like when I try to go on vacation with my kids. What's the trip today? I don't know. Half the day, you're trying to figure out what to do because nobody can figure out what they want to do. And finally, at 1 p.m., someone says, let's just go here. Okay, we'll go here. Why can't you say it in the morning? Because everyone's waiting for the next person to say to make the first move. Maybe it doesn't happen to you. I'm just saying what happens to me. I get into a fight with somebody. I say, I have no problem. I'm willing to apologize, but I want that one person to apologize first. As soon as you apologize, I'm going to apologize, right? So this is very common in human relationships. Who's going to be the bigger one? Who's going to take the first step? And who's supposed to do it? And I asked that as a trick question because the answer, of course, is that unless you're talking about a parent and a very young child, both people have to take the initiative. Maybe in different times, maybe in different contexts. But if one person is always the one who takes the initiative, I always have to decide. It's not a relationship. It's a one way. It's a hierarchy. It's a certain form of a relationship, but it's not a healthy relationship between adults. And there has to be certain times where you take the first step, and other times when I take the first step. And if you look at the Jewish holidays, it's exactly what happens. Those holidays that are happening in the first month, the full moon, that represents the full moon is the sun is shining on the moon. We're the moon. We're the recipient. We're the woman. We're the female in the relationship. God is the masculine. God is the giver. When you have a full moon, it means that God is shining on you completely, which means God is doing all the initiation. What do we have to do? Nothing. We just reflect the light of God. We don't have to do anything. We have to show up. Then there are holidays where and that's Passover. Both Passover and Sukkot are the full moon, but both Sukkot, even though it's 6 months later, what are we celebrating? God placed us in the huts when we left Egypt. It's all that God did for us. What did we do to leave Egypt? Answer, nothing. Okay? So Passover and Sukkot is full moon is what God does for us. But then 6 months later, God says, I'm not doing anything. You want to talk to me? You pick up the phone. I'm not calling you. You call me. And what is that? That is Rosh Hashanah. What's Rosh Hashanah? Literally pick up the phone and call. Yom Teruah Zichron Teruah. You sound the shofar. You call to God. God's not doing anything. And therefore we almost have two New Years, by the way, because Nisan is the first for the months, Passover, and then the New Year is Shavuot. We have 2 New Years in a way. And basically, because there's the elements of the relationship. There's what God does for us. That's Nisan, but it's the full month. That's the 15th day of the month. And then there's Rosh Hashanah, which is you have to do it. And by the way, what is Shavuot? There's one more holiday. What is Shavuot? Halfway. We split the difference. It's day 6. Day 6, half a moon. Now, what happened on Shavuos? Shavuos is not you initiate. We both initiate. We do this together. What is that? The day we got the Torah. Where do you see in the Torah that you have both parties invested together? Because in the Torah, there's 2 parts. There's the written Torah and there's the oral Torah. The written Torah is what God does for the Torah. God says, these are the words. This is holy. This is revelation. These are the holy words. This is what you do. But then there's the human part, which is the oral tradition, which is what was passed on, but also how we interpret the laws based on the traditions that were passed on. And here, human participation is critical and is key, and that's the bread and butter of the oral Torah. So Shavuos, because this is the time when we celebrate the Torah, and the Torah has both components. Therefore, in the moon, it's half the moon is shining and half is dark. So that's a beautiful teaching, and it's very visual. And whenever I learn with kids, I always say, no matter what you do, they find it fascinating. No matter what you do, whenever you go to a Passover Seder for the rest of your life, if there's a moon, if it's not cloudy, there's going to be a full moon. And when you go to Shul on Shavuot, on Rosh Hashanah, and you go outside, you're not really going to see the moon. Maybe a sliver, maybe, probably not. Because it's the first day, but it could be the moon past the sun. It could be it's during the daytime, so you may not see it till the next night, whatever. Yom Kippur, it's going to be half. Day 10, it's going to be half, a little more than half. And like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. Trust me. If it's not, call me up after Passover and sue me. But that's the point. It's a beautiful teaching, beautiful visual, and I love that. And Shoshana Ruth says, I love this moon teaching also, and share it as much as possible since I first heard it from you. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I love this stuff. Yep, you have Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yeah, it's relevant to Yom Ha'atzmaut, day 5. It's half and half. It's a miracle, but it's a miracle that required human sacrifice and human initiative. So everything fits. So thank you all for joining. This was a lot of fun as always, and we'll see each other in good health, God willing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.